Reluctant Enemies. Not sure how much this deserves a review because I did Burma before, but the wrap-in review for that was very short. That was back in the days when I could only load like 5-minute videos up because of the size of my files and my YouTube permissions and all that. Now I can go on and on and on forever without. Okay. So I was rather reluctant to play this, actually. Had an option at Consim World, tried reading the rules, and just was like, oh, this is too much for me. I know I've played it before, but it's too much. It was difficult to get started. OCS is a hard system. The rules are fairly complex, and it takes quite a bit to kind of just push through and understand what you're supposed to do. The rules are very well written. They're a great reference. They're a very, very good rule book. In fact, I would say they're among the best rule books out there, but we're on version 4 by now. Really, a lot of work's been put into them. And one of the greatest things about them, only the gamers do this as far as I know still. There may be other companies, but they've always put their rules on really good stock. It's sturdy. You can write on it if you need to with a pencil and erase it. And none of that crappy, I don't know what the hell it is, but it ain't quite paper. It dissolves in water. I mean, yes, paper should dissolve in water, but this is really good quality stock that just exceeds anything else out there. They put it in nice columns. They get the whole formatting and presentation of the rules is tremendous. And the writing of the rules is, as I said, very, very good, but it is still a complex enough game that it's some significant effort just to learn the rules. And then where the game really becomes hard is how to apply those rules at all effectively. There's so many different interlocking pieces, so many different systems going on here. And it's not like, there's big strategic games I have that have lots and lots of systems and they have effects on each other, but they're not quite so tightly coupled. If you're looking at something like, Le Grand Guerre, World at War with, basically, for your overall strategy, you can be pretty loose about it, in the sense that you can say, well, I want to focus on a bombing strategy, right? And you build bombers, and you have to worry more about using them and everything, but it doesn't end up interfering with all your other systems in quite the same way. You have to understand how tactical bombers affect, your ground combat situation and everything. But here, everything is really, really tightly interrelated. And little decisions like, I'm going to put this unit in reserve, affect possibly things that are, far down the line. Like, you can get that extra little bit of movement by putting in reserve. It's little tricks like that that are just all baked into, putting the rules together and understanding what it all does. And so there's a lot in the system to explore and start playing with. I think in the same kind of way that ASL or SFB has a lot of interactions that allow you to pull crazy shit out of your ass. I think you can do that in this system. From the kind of, when I read the strategy guides type stuff, I'm like, geez, these people are just so far above me in this, And clearly there are people putting OCS videos out of various kinds who really understand the system, which is kind of one of the reasons that I'm not the perfect person to do it. It does have a good, strong fan base, and people are now putting, at least the video resources out to help it. However, I like playing it, and I wanted to get back to it. And this seemed like a good opportunity to do so. And even though I was very reluctant, this system just shines through so well. Even with my inexperience and feeling frustrated that I'm not understanding how to do things correctly, it still gives one hell of a nice story, a good amount of detail, and it gives you so many choices that you can just look at it and say, I'm going to be challenged by this game for as long as I want to play it. You know, I mean, I could break this one out and play it again and again, this particular scenario, and be challenged again and again. And that's something I don't think you really get with ASL. I think there's sort of optimal little puzzles to each ASL scenario. I'm not sure there really is to something like this. Because unlike ASL, which has, this, okay, you've got this whole, quantity of interrelations of the rules, but there's a very limited number of pieces. So the number of choices that you have in a normal sized ASL scenario limits the replayability of that scenario. Of course, there's so many scenarios. The fact that this is part of a series that has a lot of games in it, you could play this for your whole life, not this particular scenario. You could play OCS, though, as the only game you play in the same sort of way. It could become your lifetime game. And, especially since there seems to still be desire to put out more and more of them. You see, they keep cranking them out. And sort of the rules with that is, if somebody's willing to design the game and convince Dean that it is a playable, interesting situation, they'll support you, in terms of, if you get all the work done, we'll publish it. He's made that very clear. You got something you want to see covered and you think it can be done in OCS, do it, and we'll see. Anyway, so why is it so damn great? At least, why does it look like it is? And also why it's so damn different is because it just takes the concepts that the wargaming community has had, and without really, going off the wall. It's not like, oh, look, little bubbles on the map and all that crap. Oh, look, deck of cards to control everything. Without any of that, it changed the entire paradigm. By making supply the focus, and by making it so damn important in the game, what you ended up with is not this continuous front bashing up against each other, trying to chip away corners and this, that, and the other, trying to find some kind of purchase where they can just, push the enemy back. Instead, what you've got is like these bunches of units that are out trying to smash into and break through the enemy front, and then get a deep penetration and exploit the flanks in that way and create, an opening. It's something that overall most of the different techniques that had been used just didn't do it correctly enough. And between supply and some of the other facets of the way the sequence of play works, the way the artillery functionality works in it, just everything comes together to present what is a far more, I'm not going to say necessarily detailed, but believable representation. Which is to say that the other games may be abstracting some of this stuff, in which case you're saying, well, it's more detailed. Yeah, but it's not just that it's directly representing what's happening better. It's that some of the indirect effects of that representation are coming through more clearly. Okay. What about Reluctant Enemies itself, though? Because this has been billed as, the intro game, right? Well, they went out of their way to try to make it that. First of all, it's small. You don't have to get your head around as much of a game if you're going to play the whole thing. Secondly, they gave you the starter guide, which is really, it's useless to me, but it's a nicely done, I think first couple turns, or maybe just first turn. I think it's just one turn. And actually, they give something very useful here, which is some other small scenario, a list of some of the smaller scenarios that are available in some of the big games that are available. Huh. And there's something that I didn't even look at because it jumped into this damn... It jumped into this damn playthrough as the first thing, and then there's some additional notes here in the back discussing some of the rules situations. So I would at least, even if you're not going to read the playthrough, I would start at like page 13 and say, there's some interesting information here about things that you can do that are kind of gotchas. I kind of wish I had looked at that more carefully. I may have glanced at it. Is this rules summary and explanation? This is a great place to start if you've never played before. It gives you a little bit more richness to explaining the basic concepts of the game than the core rulebook does. And it gives you sort of the introduction to get your feet wet in it. But if you've played the game already, it's still useful. I mean, not if you're an expert, I'm sure. But, I found looking this over got me more in the capability for it. The negative, we've got these nice setup charts. I don't think these are included in most of the games. I think most of them, have more of a gamer's style setup sheet, which is kind of, that's kind of daunting, and it takes a certain level of learning to cope with to begin with. It takes maybe 5 minutes or so of looking at it saying, what the hell do they mean within, because the gamers' games use this weird sort of math numbering notation where they only number every 5 hexes in a column or something like that. And it just, some of their notations you have to go look up and figure out what they mean. They've gotten better at filling that out at least. Why it may not be the best. Well, it's also an interesting situation where you have 3 axis of advance. They're all kind of separated from each other, and you have to figure out what you're going to do and how you're going to do your pushes, at least as the allies. And as the Vichy French, you have to figure out how you're going to be able to create a mobile enough defense that if the allies are attacking in a different way than you expected, you can at least shift your forces effectively. That's it. But it's got some problems as a starter game. First off, it doesn't have a tiny little scenario. It has a small scenario, and in fact, the scenarios that are suggested over in the starter game are also small scenarios. They're interesting to play. They're things you could play 3 or 4 times easily and get some fun out of the system. But Burma, and I believe some of the others, have, I started with Burma, a very, very tiny scenario that's like half a turn. I think I saw one in DAC too. It's like half a turn. It gives you one little operation to conduct. You want to take this town, and you have a few pieces, and the defender has a few pieces, and you get to learn the system on such a tiny level that you begin to see how the base mechanisms to it work. And you know enough at that point that you can tackle, I believe, anything. Okay, at some level of competence. It's like in Victory Games Vietnam, where they gave Operation Starlight, which is basically something where you have no decisions to make and you move some pieces around on the board. You have decisions, but they're trivial. Like, you have to be an idiot to make them wrong, right? And it gives you the idea of how the core system works. And that's exactly what I think should be happening here. Something so tiny that you don't really have a lot of thought. You're just trying to get the mechanism of play down. And most of the mechanisms of play, right? You should be with an opportunity to do some kind of artillery barrage, some kind of exploitation movement, all this. Make it a tiny little puzzle. Make it something that in 2 or 3 plays you can play perfectly and you're never going to look at again. But or maybe after 1 play you understand the system enough that, I don't want to play this stupid little thing. But I mean, even for the most competitive, I want to do the best that I can on this tiny scenario type player, don't worry about trying to make it terribly interesting to them. Use it simply as a learning tool. And it takes up a paragraph of rules, uses the components already in the game, and it would be pretty easy to do. And in fact, I would strongly suggest that someone who understands Reluctant Enemies and the OCS well, try to present something like that, because as long as this is being sold as an introductory scenario, it's missing something that I feel would be vital to my learning. Now, maybe a bunch of people get that out of following these operations that are in here and playing them out. That's fine. It's just, that's not my way of learning. And I'm saying there's a bunch of us who probably learn the way I do. They don't want to read someone else playing the game any more than they want to stand and watch someone else play the game. Of course, they're not watching this video because people like to watch games. I'll be watching, the only people who will be watching this are people who like to watch things being played, so they probably like that. But, yeah. All right. So that's actually the biggest negative to it. Another possible negative is you don't have a lot of armor in this game, and I didn't get a good feel for that kind of armored attack type situation. Tunisia was suggested, and now we have Tunisia 2 out, which I haven't really taken a look at. I don't know if it's been changed in scale, probably, which will allow you to deal a little bit more with the kind of armored attacks that you're going to see in the bigger games. And since my only experience is this in Burma, that's going to be new to me, and I'm probably not going to go to Tunisia. My guess is DAC is my next OCS game. But that's a long way off, because unfortunately I have a number of other games that I'm basically contracted to do, one way or another. Okay. What about Reluctant Enemies as a interesting situation? So, it's not as free and open as I would guess the big Eastfront games are. It's got these channels that you really can attack along. One along the coast, one along this road here, and one coming up along the rails and road here. There's a possibility of kind of a side attack coming from this way. But the roads and the railways define where your supply lines are going to be, and it's not like you can't go around them and head off in other directions or something. It's just so inefficient you're not going to do so, right? It's not going to be the way you're going to press on. It might be the way that you end up, sending some small force to do some specific task to try to get behind the enemy or something. But because of that channeling, and it's channeled by the terrain, not just the roads, but also the terrain here. So this stuff, you're not going to be moving motorized things, through this rough terrain here. Foot units can go pretty well through most of it, although these cost 2 points. The tan here costs 2 points per hex moved in, which is kind of expensive, and your supply lines are going to be tough. So these little hilly roads work really well for transporting across, so you can get your trucks going across. And you're certainly not going to be moving around in the mountains or in the lava fields you have air power, you have the Brits coming in with way too little force for what they're doing, but it's going to grow. And the French with a fairly powerful force to begin with. And you have different things that dominate each of these terrain paths. So over here, it's clearer terrain for the most part, but with some close-in terrain right next to the coastline. So you can get your armor through there to do something, to try to punch through, but I think probably the most important thing in here is you have some naval capabilities which help give you some free artillery in this range. Over here, it's big open for a lot of space, which means you got a lot of room to play around with the few tanks and stuff that you have. Things could actually move pretty quickly. I didn't see it happen because the troops just kind of parked next to each other and couldn't really get a grip on each other. I didn't have enough of a force differential to be able to smash the enemy out of the way, or to be able to even threaten his position enough that he had to fall back. Although the French did for a while, and they pushed forward quite far. Over here, you have, coming up here, no big deal, but once you get to about here, you have some kind of rough terrain, and it's hard to see that you could punch through easily. Obviously, you're not going to be using your armor there. You're not going to be doing, fast movements through there. But if you got a significant numerical advantage here, a combination of artillery, air power, you could break through here as well. And you always want your firepower advantage. I have heard some people say firepower is not worth it. It's a waste of supply. I disagree completely. I am so pro firepower in this game. But I'm a World War I type of guy, and I may be too cautious to be playing the OCS. So don't take my my opinion on such as a matter of record. However, I certainly don't see the pro players. They're no pros, but I mean the people who really commit to this game in the write-ups, etc., saying, yeah, artillery's garbage. Some of the options that you can use in the series can significantly change the way the actual small level play is done. So for example, the one that I most like to look at, because it struck me the hardest, was the choice on whether or not artillery can fire defensively without a reaction marker. I think it gives a significant advantage across the board to the defending player to use that. In terms of the small level integration, though, it means that you don't have this tough choice of, do I put my reserve marker on my artillery or do I use it somewhere else? The reserve marker on the artillery is not a bad idea if you're not playing with that option, because that defensive artillery can break up an enemy's attack so easily. Recently there was a discussion over on Board Game Geek about supply, cutting off supply on rail lines, etc. And are games too focused on the rail lines? And I sort of directed the initial poster to look at the OCS. You got rail lines in it, but they're just a part of your supply. And the OP was not terribly receptive to that idea. He seemed to think that your whole army could be destroyed if somebody just ran a fairly decent sized unit behind your rail line. And he showed an example on some other game of what he's talking about. And I looked at the example and I said to myself, that unit's dead. Whatever he sent there. The question is what he gets for sacrificing that unit. You might force, by making that movement around and threatening somebody's supply line, here's what you might do. If they have no parallel supply lines, no other way of getting their trace supply towards them, which could be through extenders and all kind of stuff, which we didn't see here. They're not included in this one. But if they had that, because the roads are considered supply lines in this, unlike normal OCS. So whatever the extenders are, they're abstracted away. Less counters needed on the map, less complicated rules to deal with. It's not a bad option. But if you haven't built yourself a parallel route for the supply, then maybe you're in a little bit of trouble and you have to make a decision. Now, because of the sequence of play, you don't suffer right away just because somebody drove up to you. They're either doing it during their turn, in which case you have your movement phase to fix things, or they're doing it during your turn's reaction phase, in which case it happened just after your supply phase, and you have your exploitation phase, if that's an issue, and then your entire next turn's movement and your reaction phase against them if you didn't want to do it during exploitation, to fix your supply system. You have a lot of opportunities to pull back if somebody threatens your supply. You also have the opportunity, and this is why I say that unit's dead, you could throw some units off of your front line and go back and deal with the problem of some jerk moving back there. So they've really got to move in force to cut your supplies, to the extent that they're moving with a supplied force of their own, one that can sustain itself. It is possible to throw raiders in OCS. And the answer to that, and we're talking about small unit raiders, not something like this guy was talking about, which is, send a panzer division to cut the lines. The answer to that is you garrison things. You leave some mobile forces behind the lines, and you protect your supply sources. And I don't think I did a very good job of that. I saw places where it looked like a raider could get through and do something nasty. On the other hand, there aren't a lot of things that really were capable of moving out there. So here's the problem. A cav raider could be a problem. But generally what you're talking about with raiders is motorized stuff that tends to move even faster than cav. And the problem with motorized stuff is it needs fuel. Which means you have to send some trucks or something out with your raiders carrying the fuel so that they can make it back. They can't use internal supplies for movement. They can only use them for combat. So you end up with this kind of, just how much do I want to risk here to do a quick raid out there? And what might be worthwhile, what is worthwhile is if you see a supply dump out there, your raiders can run up, grab that. They might capture part of it. They should capture part of it. And then they have some fuel available for their way home afterwards. And they've done some damage. That's the kind of raids that work in the game. There are some stupid optional rules in case you don't want to deal with guarding your supply lines in that sort of way, in case you don't want to worry about the possibility. Because here's the thing. You don't have fixed zones of control. You're not going to stop the enemy from penetrating your force and going forward. It ain't World War I, right? If the enemy wants to go, and this is going to be really important in DAC, if the enemy wants to send out a long-range reconnaissance unit to go, look for your supplies, well, that historically happened. They were a pain in the ass. The Desert Raiders and such not. So, I think the game captures the reality very well. I think there are a couple of edge cases. So, for example, the defensive artillery. I like that option because I don't believe that the base rules as written really cover how defensive artillery was used as well. I just worry that the effect of using defensive artillery gives too much of an edge to the defending side overall. The games are already kind of balanced with that not in mind. And that actually the system, much worse than the games are balanced, the system's balanced in a way that the defender already has certain advantages built in that the defending artillery kind of prevents. However, that defending artillery generally doesn't wipe out the enemy or make things horrible. It's not like in games where you get to just throw it into the combat factor and say, you got screwed. It generally delays their attack. It disorganizes them for their turn, which means they're not going to be able to launch an effective attack. The other, oh, I'm almost out of video, which means it's time to go. The other one that I kind of am edging more towards is attacking an empty hex. It relates around a couple of things. If your bombardment's too successful, you can advance into the why can't you advance into the empty hex? The base rules don't handle that. And why is it that units that are, making an attack get an extra hex of movement? All right, well, it's a simple enough option to put in place. You pay for the attack with whatever units you want to advance, and you can advance. And it answers both of those little edge case questions. I don't think that one has a terribly big effect, you could say. And honestly, the defensive artillery may not either, because here's the thing. This game is kind of a weird one, in the sense that the defensive positions are kind of static. So it only really helps a static defensive position, which honestly, they can use help in the series, from what I understand. A mobile, because Dean's concept of defense in World War II is a mobile defense, where your best defense is to avoid the enemy, to throw reinforcements in where he's hitting, and most importantly, to counterattack, to break up his attack on your own actions. And you can do that with offensive turn artillery fire just as well as you can with defensive. It's just that you are giving a little bit more. You're given more time to make your decision with the defensive artillery option. So I really don't know how big a deal it makes, except for with the static defensive line. If you've got that static line, those tended to be a little too brittle, perhaps. So, and I'm not the person to ask that, but so. Maybe it's not that big a deal to add that option. Maybe it's actually helping a little bit. I don't know. Depends on your flavor, If you want to give more advantage to the mobile side of the warfare, and the game is already very designed in that is very much designed in that direction, you probably don't want to add that option. But that's all. Anyway. It's such a strong system. I'm not a fan of operational games. I'm not a fan of World War II games. This system draws me in a way that almost no other World War II game land game lower than strategic does. I mean, I want the grand strategic. I want the, making all the political decisions and everything. Those are fun to me. But what's shocking to me is how much this just kind of opened my eyes and said, wow, what a fucking amazing system. I mean, that's really what it comes down to, is it's like, yeah, those other games were kind of bullshit. It doesn't mean they're not fun. Some of them I can still have a good time with. And it's just that most of them feel kind of like the very non-detailed schlock that was put out for way too long in the non-World War II side of things. And they play kind of like it. I can't tell if I'm playing Napoleonics or if I'm playing... And sure, you put the exploit phase in. Something like Panzerkrieg is starting to move in this direction, but it's still... This is so much different from those. Just such a level above in terms of the picture that you're getting, and how much it's presenting, these mobile forces in a kind of more accurate sort of way. Because the Panzerkrieg model is kind of like the WIF model. It's perfectly applicable at a strategic level. It doesn't really give you the detail, I think, that you need to make the operational level shine. All right.